Hey everyone, Rich Wu here. Was just on the root of all success with the real Jason Duncan. And man, we just had an incredible interview. Jason asked some really good questions that got to the heart of a topic that's really important to me, which is building deep and meaningful connections in a world where we're more connected than ever, but more disconnected than ever. So, Jason, thanks for having me on the show, and guests, excited to have you tune in.
Welcome to the root of all success with the real Jason Duncan, a podcast that explores how the world's most powerful entrepreneurs unlocked success and how their stories can help you do the same. A successful educator turned entrepreneur, Jason has built multi-million-dollar businesses that have been featured in Inc. magazine and Entrepreneur magazine. His life's mission now is helping entrepreneurs live what he calls #the exit lifestyle. Introducing TEDx speaker, mastermind leader, author, entrepreneur, cigar aficionado, motorcycle enthusiast, and host of The Root of All Success, the real Jason Duncan. The real Jason Duncan.
Welcome back to another episode of the show. I'm your host, the real Jason Duncan. Don't get me confused with the fake Jason Duncan. And yes, there are fakes out there. People ask me that all the time, but that is true. And there's a whole long story that I could share with you later. If you want to meet up over cigar and suburban, I could tell you why I am the real Jason Duncan. It is an actually interesting story, one that's not going to interrupt my interview today with my guest, Rich Wu. Rich is a great dude. He and I met because I was a guest on his podcast, which we're going to talk a little bit about at the beginning of the show, because I think you should go listen to it. I think those of us like you who listen to podcasts need to find good podcasts to listen to. And Rich has got a good one. He's one of the best hosts that I've experienced in podcasting, in that he asks great questions. And I can only imagine if he did that with me, he does that with all of his guests, which would make for an interesting listen. It's called The Power of Connections. And what that show does, it examines how our most impactful relationships in the past and present are shaping our futures. And I think it was a really interesting conversation that he and I had. And I'm really anxious to talk to him today on my show. Let me tell you a little bit about who he is. Rich his mission in life is to love and serve God, family, friends, clients, and community, and the multi-generations of people that he will never know, thereby making the biggest positive impact on this world. He currently serves as the founder and wealth advisor at a company called Catalyst Planning Partners. And that's where he and his team advise on over $600 million worth of assets. His upcoming book, which we'll talk about in the show today, is called The Relationship Recession. Very interesting title. And it's focused on loneliness and the loneliness epidemic that we're dealing with here in this country and in this world, and the practical ways that we can rebuild friendships and deepen them over time. And I know that when he and I talked about this in his show, it actually made me reach out to some people that I had not reached out to in a while. So Rich is a great guy, and it's exciting for me to bring him to the root of all success today. So Rich, welcome to the show.
Jason, so good to be with you, man. Thanks for having me on the show. It's an honor, and I'm just excited to catch up with you.
Well, let's talk about this. Why, you've written about relationships. Your show is about the power of connections. Why is this such an interesting topic for you?
It's kind of like what Steve Jobs said in his biography. Life is like a bunch of disconnected dots, and a lot of times it makes sense when you look backwards and you see how all the dots connect. I feel like at 43. Very thankful for a career that I love and enjoy and have invested, almost 15, 16 years in. And I got to a point where I said, wow, like I want to work on some other projects that are important to me. And so, a year and a half ago, I set out to write the book that I wrote and you had mentioned. And a little over a year ago, also started my podcast, which is about relationships. And I think something that's become very clear to me as I look back on all these different separate projects is this common thread of relationships. And I think that understanding a lot more of my purpose now to be someone who, to your point, as I mentioned, as you mentioned, is, to love and serve God, people, family, friends, clients, and communities. But in that, I think is this kind of theme that, man, I just want to make people aware of the importance of relationships. I think there's a lot of stuff about, hey, you got to get healthy, you got to make more money. There's just so much out there on social media that we got to pay attention to. And I think often what gets neglected is actually the importance of relationships. And so I think that's a big part of my story and a big part of what I want to do with the rest of my life, make people aware and reawaken the sense of urgency around investing in relationships.
So your business is in money. You're a money guy. So Catalyst Planning Partners is about financial planning.
Yeah.
Your website is catalyst.nm.com. So people can go check you out at catalyst.nm.com. Or I'm sure you can Google Catalyst Planning Partners, Orange County, California, probably look you up. But do you think your I guess time in the business world as a money guy has influenced your focus and your perspective on relationships? And if so, how?
100%. 100%. And in talking with a lot of people, it's interesting because a lot of times people come to us for advice and for planning and for organization and peace of mind. In return, in the time that I've been working, I feel like I've come away with more than just a job and a career and, making an income. I feel like I've just got a treasure trove of information, life experiences, both good and bad, that I've experienced through the lens of the clients that we work with. And oftentimes, especially and this is what I'm finding more recently, I'm finding that a lot of folks who have a significant amount of wealth, um, maybe have a lot of things backwards. They're still working hard. Their object is money and achievement and success, and all of that I think is great. But I think one of the things that we're coming to learn in a lot of the conversations that we're having is, but at what cost, right? So making that extra X amount of dollars, making that next title, building that next business after you have a certain baseline amount of money, what's the point? And I think a lot of the challenging conversations that we're having is, hey, how's your family doing? How's your relationship with your spouse? How's your relationship with your close friends? Are you investing in your children? And so I'm learning about a lot of the successes and all the mistakes about relationships, a lot of times through the lens of the wins and losses that our clients are having. So I've been really blessed to just get a lot more out of my career than just, again, a good job and some income.
So you asked the question, or you didn't really ask a question, but you used this phrase, and it made me think of a question: is cost. Like, it ends up costing us more than we're willing to pay.
Yeah,
So success, which this show is all about, does in fact end up costing people a lot more than they would have ordinarily wanted to pay, but they didn't think about it until it's too late.
that's
So
right.
what does it cost? So I think your question is pretty introspective, even though you may not have thought about going that deep with it. But what does it cost to pursue things when we leave out relationships, when we forget that there are people around us that are much more important than the money and the fame and the recognition and the likes and the followers that we're seeking? What does it cost? Have you thought about that?
Really good question, Jason. That's actually the premise of the book that I wrote, The Relationship Recession. So a lot of it's built off of a 1938 study that was done by Harvard. It's actually the longest longitudinal study that's out there. And it was examining why, happiness and longevity and what determines that. And there's a lot of different factors, but the number one thing that they found in that study, after tracking 800 people over 90 years, actually the guy who started the study isn't alive. They had to replace him because he passed away because the study was so long. And what they found was that deep, meaningful connections kept people living happy and long lives. I forget exactly the stat, but there was something to the extent of people who had twice the amount of connections as kind of the average person ended up living like 20 years longer and, quite frankly, happier lives in their lifespan. And so that tells us relationships are so vitally important. And yet, if you look at the stats now, more than 50% of Americans report to being dissatisfied with the level of their relationships. 57% of Americans when surveyed, say they feel lonely some or most of the time. And so if we know that relationships are so critical, and yet the stats are showing us that we're not really investing in them, something needs to change. So that to me is pointing to a big problem. I think a lot of people know how to make money. I think a lot of people know that they have to build their careers. I don't know if a lot of people are thinking about their relationships in that way and placing importance on it.
So if we do try to pose an answer to that introspective question, what is the cost of relationships, or what is the cost of not having relationships? It could be in that study 20 years. And what's a year worth? I mean, if you're at the end of your life, a year is worth a lot more than if you're in the middle of your life, or especially if you're at the beginning. I mean, what does a 6-year-old think about a year? Nothing. It doesn't mean anything to them. It doesn't have any meaning whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're 86 years old or 96 years old, what is a year worth? It's a lot. So relationships, if that study, as you are talking about that study reveals that building deep and meaningful relationships actually give you the thing that's the most valuable, and that's time. Isn't that interesting?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that's a good point. And I would also add, it's not just the time, because you can have a lot of time, but if you're miserable in it, what's the point,
That's true.
right? It's also paired with enjoying that time, right? If I'm 66 and you told me, hey, I've got another extra 20 years, but I'm estranged from my spouse, don't have any friends, my kids don't like me, no one wants to be around me, what's the point? Right? So you just sit and look at a pile of money in the corner of your house, or look at your statements. I mean, I don't know how many people say, yeah, that alone brings me joy. Don't need to hang out with anybody. I just it makes me think too. Like, I was talking to someone who works at a family office for a billionaire, and he was telling me this person, private jets, has everything that he could ever imagine, unhappy, broken household, rift with his kids, doesn't know who he can trust, doesn't have friends that he can confide in. Because, it's like when you have that level of money too, you're always wondering, like, do people want to be friends with me for me? He's not happy. And yet the world would look from the outside and say, man, this guy's got everything. What do you mean you're not happy? But, I would argue in part that, man, he's just, I think, the relationship part's disconnected. And so it doesn't matter how much money you got.
Do you know? Have you ever heard of the author Johann Hari?
I've heard of him.
So he wrote a book called Lost Connections.
Hmm.
I read it years ago, and something you're talking about here just made me think of his book, and it might be a book that other people want to look at, because your book is the power, or your podcast is the power of connections, and then you got the relationship recession is the name of the book. But in his book, Lost Connections, his premise is that, after doing a study, is that depression is really a result of lost connections with people.
Mm.
And it can't be treated, and this is his perspective, it can't be treated with drugs or narcotics or what are those SSRIs, that depression can't effectively be treated that way. It's just treating the symptoms, but the real cause of depression, according to him, is lost connections. And I think what you're talking about here, and if we're proposing the question, what's the cost of relationships and what's the benefit of relationships, is that if you're experiencing depression, anxiety, it could be you just don't have enough deep, meaningful connections and relationships in your life. So if that's the case, Rich, what is your experience and what is your advice on how we could deepen those relationships and reconnect with people in a way that's helpful and healthy for us?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I talk about this in my book, but I think it depends on what stage you're at. So I find that people are in one of three stages. Either one, they're just at a place where they have a mental block. So they know that relationships aren't right, but they're not even in a state where they're open. So I think step one is to just get into a mental, headspace to say, hey, I want to be open again. I want to make some new relationships. I want to change the way that my relationships are currently going. I think a lot of people are stuck there. They don't even know it, right? So, things come up, people ask them to hang out, people want to spend time with them, and they just can't get out of that. And so I think acknowledging that and saying, hey, this will be good for me. Maybe I don't even feel like it, but maybe I'll just take a chance. And getting to that mental headspace, I think is the first step. I think once you're in the mental headspace, the second thing to think about is just going out and building new relationships. So maybe you don't have any relationships, or the relationships you have, they're not great. So I think there's a lot of practical things you can do. I think, think about the things that you enjoy. You like music, you like playing sports, you like going out to eat. So many things you can plug into. People love having dinner clubs and book clubs, and there's rec sports to do. So it's just getting out and getting to where people are at, doing the things you want to do. And then I think there's some of us who, hey, we're in a space that we value relationships. We got a fair amount of friends, but there's not that level of depth. Like, I know a lot of people who know hundreds of people, but if I asked them, hey, if you were, if it was 2 a.m. and you were at the side of the road and you needed some help, like you needed someone to pick you up, like your phone wasn't, your phone was working, but you couldn't get on Uber for some reason, you needed someone to pick you up, who would you call on? And a lot of people have trouble saying, like, well, I don't know, because I don't know if they'd actually come. I think it's about then deepening those friendships that you have, because that's where a lot of the richness of life, I think, comes from. I think the key there is not to think about, wow, like where can I find some of these friends? I think that process starts with first becoming a friend that you want in your life, right? So if I want someone who's going to be there for me at 2 a.m., am I that person for people? If I want someone who, man, will listen to me when I'm going through tough stuff, like, have I done that for anyone lately?
Mm,
So I think a lot of it depends on where you're at, but there's a
yeah.
lot of practical steps that you can take. But I think it starts with understanding where you're at.
Well, I think it's what I'm beginning to think about as we have this conversation is that how do what is a way that we as a society punish people? And one of the things we do is we lock them away, and even furthermore is we put them in isolation,
Yeah.
solitary confinement as a punishment, which stands to reason that if we're doing that, there has to be some negative effect of that, which would, in somebody's mind, make them want to do better later. But let's go all the way back to the beginning. And I think you as a follower of Jesus, and I as one as well, we could dive into this a little bit. As we look back at the creation, we were created to be in relationship by God, who is in perfect relationship with himself, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. So there's this perfect synchronicity of this relationship between the three personalities or three parts of God. And then he creates the universe, and mankind is the top, the pinnacle of his creation, you and me, and all the people who've come before us and will be after us. And he created us to be in relationship with one another. And then when we see sin enter, and there's a banishment, like you can't be here anymore. So it's a putting away. So it's a broken relationship. And then when Cain kills Abel, what happens? He's banished, he's put away. So it seems to me like the cost of not having relationships is way higher than the cost of maintaining and reaching out and creating relationships. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. It was interesting when we were having the previous discussion, and when you're talking about loneliness. Uh, Absolutely, right. In prison, like the worst punishment you can get is not, getting beaten, or it's solitary confinement, when you're not in community with other people and you're just literally with yourself. And I also think about the context of like raising children. I've got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and I'm learning right now and just parenting how important connection is. When your kids are, acting up and being disruptive, it's so easy to default, at least for me, to get upset and agitate. Hey, why are you doing that? And like, hey, go to your room, sit by yourself, right? Like some of the stuff maybe our parents did to us. But the reality is, and not that you're trying to reward bad behavior, but the step that you need to take there is actually find connection. Hey, bud, you're not allowed to hit your little brother, but I see that you're frustrated, and you know what? Even though I need you to stop doing this, Dad still loves you, and he's here for you, and he sees that you're frustrated. Man, that has so much better outcomes than just throwing them in the room and saying, "Hey, you're going to sit there for 10 minutes because you hit your little brother. You can't do that." And
Mm.
then the flip side of that is, showing the importance of connection. So I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. Like isolation, loneliness, man, those things are killers. They say that being lonely is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, right? That's just like, there's a lot of studies show the effects of loneliness. So isolation and loneliness are the silent killers of our day.
Was it on your show that I had this conversation about an app for friendships, creative friendships? Was that you that I was talking to?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about that now because I thought that was funny. Is that we've got Bumble and Tinder and the bad ones and eHarmony and all these places to connect people for romantic relationships.
Yeah.
But I thought for a while it's like, well, where's the app that connects people for which would be the brotherly type of relationship or just friendship,
Mm-hmm.
because there's all these
Mm-hmm.
different types of relationships, but like the friendship relationship that's not weird, we're not swingers, we're not trying to do any of this crazy stuff, but where's this app to get people to say, hey, we're in our 40s and we're empty nesters and we're living in this town and we like to do these things. Who's with us? Where's that app at? Is that, I can't remember I know talking about it, but I can't remember what we said. Is there an app that does this?
Yeah, there's
Let's take a quick break to thank our amazing sponsors for making this podcast possible.
As an entrepreneur, I know that you have to deal with sales on a regular basis. I mean, every entrepreneur does. And if you aren't paying attention to sales as an entrepreneur, you're not going to be an entrepreneur for very long. But I've got a sponsor of this show called Dub that helps you bring the personal back to sales. If you want to figure out how to improve content creation, improve client trust, improve your sales process, decrease the sales cycle, because we all know time kills deals. If you want to increase client bookings and increase conversions, you need to take a look at Dub. There's a special offer for Dub for listeners to The Root of All Success at therealjasonduncan.com/Dub. And that's DUBB. What Dub does, I've been using this for years. I'm a huge fan, and I'm so honored that they're our primary sponsor of the podcast. But they have helped over 60,000 businesses around the world communicate better, to make sales easier, to make sales more personal. And Dub is built for growing teams. I mean, you can set up video emails, you can set up custom onboarding, you can do admin reporting, anything you need around video and sales and automation. Dub is there. You can try Dub now. Your conversions to sales are waiting. All you got to do is go to therealjasonduncan.com/Dub. And there you're going to get 2 weeks for free to try Dub. Plus, you're going to get 50% off your first 2 months of Dub. You can't beat that. So go check it out. Go to therealjasonduncan.com/Dub.
Thanks for listening to our sponsors. Now, back to the show.
There are some different apps that are out there. I don't know a lot that have caught traction. I know there was an app called Shaper, SHAPR, that kind of connected people based on interests, and I think also in business. I think you would have to get like a critical mass to buy into that, because I think for as many people that want to use it, there's also a lot of people thinking, oh man, but if I use it, like, am I going to meet weird people? And if I'm going to do that, maybe I'm just better off meeting someone at the local basketball game or, at my church or something like that. I think where people are doing that, which is, currently the most accessible way to meet people, is just through groups, right? Meet up, the local basketball game, your church, a golf outing, because there's a lot. If you just kind of open yourself up, there's a lot more opportunities than you think to hang out. I mean, even if you just go to meetup.com and you like bowling, there's people that are bowling around you that you can meet based on your interests. It's not just random people, right? If you like, I don't know, serving and doing like nonprofit work, like you can go to a homeless shelter, and there's a lot of people who have that same interest that you could serve alongside of and get to know. So I think that's that accessibility maybe is diminishing the need for that sort of app. But you're right; it would be a lot easier if we could go, hey, I like to golf, I like to smoke cigars, I don't smoke cigars, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I like to bowl and I like to serve. Man, who else likes to do that? Let's just like instead of me having to go to a bunch of different places, let's just get to it and let's find people who have similar interests. That would be awesome. Maybe you should create it.
I don't need any new things to do, but I think
You only have
I think
8
it's,
projects you're working on, Jason.
yeah,
Come
it's
on.
too much. But I think it would be interesting. I remember back, it's over a decade ago. I don't know, maybe 15 years ago. But I was at a stage in my life, both professionally, personally, financially. I didn't have a lot of close friends. As a matter of fact, I
Mm,
had really just one. My wife and I had one couple that we hung out with, but beyond that, nobody else. And we had a lot in common as a couple, but as individuals, like the husband and I, we were very good friends, and we loved one another, had lots of respect for each other, and always enjoyed one another's company. But we didn't have a ton in common. Like that, things I like to do, he didn't like to do, and vice versa. But I remember thinking at that time, going, man, God, I just really, could you send me a friend, like a friend who, not that he wasn't a friend, but like somebody that I can do stuff with. I like to ride motorcycles. I like smoking cigars. Like those are some things I like to do. I like to go camping. Um, where are those guys? And at that time, had we had this conversation and I was still in that mental headspace, I'd be like, heck yeah, I'm going to create the app because it'll help me. So, but I'm not interested in creating an app today. No, thank you. And thank God I'm at a place now where I have a handful of really, really good close friends. And I'm very happy with the way my friendships are going because I understand the cost of relationships. The cost of relationships is worth every penny. And then also the cost of not having the relationships isn't worth it. It isn't worth not having those relationships. And we live in a society where there's too much available to us to not have those connections. And
yeah.
isn't that really the whole point of the relationship recession, as you write about, is that it isn't like we live in a place where in a time that you should be able to be more connected, not less connected.
Hmm. Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. It's Facebook, Instagram, Spotify, sharing Spotify playlists. Man, there's a million ways that you can connect with people. I'm on 20 text chains. You know, people are calling me, email. I'm on podcasts. I feel like I'm more connected than anyone possibly could be 20 years ago. And yet sometimes that creates noise and disconnection in being connected in so many different ways. You think you know what's going on in people's, I don't know. I saw what's going on in their life on Instagram. I don't need to catch up with them. Oh man, I sent him my most recent playlist on Spotify. Like, I don't need to catch up. And so all these things, these pseudo connections can give you a false sense of reality that you're actually connected to someone when you're not. Because just because I send you a playlist, and I think that's a good like entry point to maybe making a further connection. But if I sent you a playlist, I sent a friend a text, and I commented on someone's Instagram post, am I really doing life with somebody? I don't think so, right? Like, and so I think getting back to the old, for those of you that have friends that are in other states and it's a little more inaccessible, but even jumping on a FaceTime or a Zoom call or just getting together for a cup of coffee, a beer, a lunch, or a dinner, there's something powerful that happens in that human interaction that does not happen through a connection through an app. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. And I think we've gotten way, way too far away from that because of some of these pseudo interactions.
Yeah. Well, this show is called The Root of All Success. And, we want to have successful relationships. What would you consider um, a successful relationship?
I would say a successful relationship would be one that there are two people that are mutually interested in one another's growth and success. And so in every relationship, there's going to be some give and take, but we all know the ones that don't work out. It's the ones that you give a ton to, and there's nothing in return. It's just a take, take, take. We've also been, guilty of being the taker in that relationship where someone's, they're kind and they're generous and they're thinking about you, and all you do is just, yeah, give it to me, and you're not thinking about them. That there's no longevity in those relationships. I think the ones that grow to be deep and the ones that last a long time is where both people are thinking about the other person. How can I serve this person? How can I care for this person? How can I pray for this person? How can I show up in moments of pain? for this person. And so I think when there's that alignment, you got a successful relationship that's growing.
That's a very interesting perspective, and I wrote that down because I think it's a good one. We tend to think about relationships being successful when there's mutual interests, where I like motorcycles, you like motorcycles. Hey, okay. Well, that it can help, but what you said was mutual interest in one another's success. So it's looking out for the benefit of the other person as much as they're looking out for the benefit of you. And I think then that explains, if I just do a quick Rolodex of my relationships, the ones that work, it's when we have a mutual interest in one another's success, regardless
Hmm.
of our mutual interests. Isn't that
Hmm.
interesting?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. In fact, some of my best friendships, we have some things in common, but it's not like we have all 20 of our, most important things that we're working on. They don't all align, right? Like he might
Yeah.
like basketball, I might like volleyball. He might like, Asian food, I might like barbecue, so doesn't all have to align, but I think if I care about this person, I'm thinking about this person, they're thinking about me. And hey, Rich was talking about his marriage and hey, I got this book that he should read. He texted to me. I'm thinking about he's trying to grow in his career and I know a connection that can help him. I'm thinking, oh yeah, I got a good connection for him to get to the next spot in his career. That's the sort of interaction that I think that happens that creates longevity in a relationship.
How would you define that word success just in general? What does that mean to Rich Wu?
I think for me and for anyone else, I think if you understand what your purpose in life is and you're actively pursuing it and living in it, I think that's success, right? I think a lot of people think about money and career and achievement, and that's fine. That could be a part of your definition of success, but ultimately for me, and you mentioned this at the beginning of the podcast, my mission is to love and serve God, family, friends, client communities, and the multi generations of people I'll never see or meet. So I know when something's not working, I feel disconnected, disjointed. Typically, it's because I'm not doing that. It's because I'm not looking to the relationships that are important to me and investing in them and pouring into them and getting back from them. It's usually because I'm pursuing something else.
So, by that definition of pursuing your life's purpose, actively pursuing that purpose, do you consider yourself to be a successful person?
I say this with all humility. And again, this is not about money or achievement or accolades, but yes, because while not perfect, uh, I feel like in an increasing manner, I'm focused on that more than ever. I'm committed to my relationship with God. I'm committed to my wife. I'm committed to my kids. I'm committed to my good friends, close relationships. And again, not perfect, and I got a lot of room to grow, but I'm going in that direction. I'm going that direction, and I feel yes, based on that, yeah, I'm living a great life based on that definition.
So, you are a businessman who works in the money sector, helping people plan. Um, I'm sure entrepreneurs are part of who you're working with on a pretty regular basis. So, what is your best piece of advice for entrepreneurs out there?
The best piece of advice I would give to folks with regards to kind of money and in relation to the work that I do, I think you got to get clear on what you want out of life before just before you go. I just read a book by a guy named Bill Perkins. It's called Die with Zero. The book is actually very different than what the title suggests, right? The title suggests die with zero, recklessly spend your money, you could die tomorrow. It's actually not that at all. The premise of the book is that if you've got, a sum of money left at the end of your life, probably made a mistake in one of three ways. One, you could have given more of it away to the things that are important and the people that are important to you while you were alive, right? Point in case, like if I care about people dying in another country and am I going to wait 30 years to get, I mean, they're dying right now. So maybe you should give it to them right now. Right. Number two, he talks about, if you have money left over, you probably didn't experience enough. There's a lot of people who are just like, oh man, I got to hold on to this money and like I can't let it go. And especially for folks that will have a lot of money at the end of their life, they kind of defer things, like enjoy a lifestyle. And again, it doesn't mean frivolously spend money, but like enjoy it. Or three, you probably work too hard. I meet so many successful entrepreneurs. They're in their 50s. They've already made way more money than they can ever spend in their lifetime. And yet they're still working. And part of that is because of habit. They just kind of always worked. Part of that is just not like a lack of examination of their life. Like, wait a second, I'm 50. I already have enough. My kids are still in the house, but I got to make another 5, 10, $20 million. Like, how does that make sense? Maybe I'm working 80 hours a week. Maybe I should scale back, and I should actually spend more time with my family and the things that I enjoy before it's quite frankly too late.
Yeah.
So I think it's just getting really clear on what you're doing and why you're doing it. And then you can kind of figure out what actions you need to take.
Well, I want to invite everybody to take a look at Rich's LinkedIn. Go to find him at Rich Woo. That's WOO on LinkedIn. And also on Instagram, he's Rich_Woo. So go take a look at his stuff. And if you want to be rich, you need to meet with Rich and his folks over at Catalyst Planning Partners. Go to catalyst.nm.com. You like that? I can see you like that little comment. Anybody ever said that? If you want to be rich, go see Rich.
Oh man, I need to capture this reel and put it on my Instagram.
Well, you can have it. You can have it, my man. Well, I'm going to as we close out the show today, I want to give you the last word as we've had this conversation about the cost of relationships and about what successful relationships look like. We've got some really good nuggets of information you've given. I want to give you the last word to speak to the audience.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jason. It just makes me think of, again, something that I've been thinking about more recently. And you don't know how much time you have left. I think the biggest mistake that people make in their lifetime is they think they have an infinite amount of time with people and on earth. And the reality is you have no idea. You could be gone tomorrow. The people you love can be gone tomorrow. And so taking close examination at your life and investing in the ones that matter, they might not be here 5, 10 years from now. You might not be. So focus on them now. You've got the rest of your life to work and make money and do all these things. But you need to really, really pay close attention to that. And you'll never regret it. I've never looked back in my life and said, oh my gosh, I spent too much time with my kids or my best friends. You never. But most other things, typically you can find regret in it.
Don't live with regret. Thank you, Rich, for being on the show, man. I appreciate your insights about the cost of relationships. And make sure you be looking up his podcast, The Power of Connections. Go check that out. And then his book is going to be coming out soon, maybe by the time that we get this podcast released, called The Relationship Recession. So thank you, Rich, for being on the show. And thank you, Mr. or Mrs. Listener, for being here and watching or listening to the show. We're on all the podcast players. We're on YouTube. Thank you for subscribing, for leaving good reviews, because it gets us greater guests just like Rich here on the show for us to interview. But as always, this show is dedicated to uncovering what the root of success is for people. And here I think we can determine that the root of Rich's success has been in building positive, meaningful relationships with the mutual interest for each other's success. So thank you for listening, and thank you for tuning in. I am the real Jason Duncan, and as always, Jesus is King.
Attention business owners. Attention business owners. Feeling burnout from running your business? Uncertain if you're nearing burnout? Take our free 10-question business burnout test at businessburnouttest.com to discover where you stand. With just 10 quick questions, you'll learn how to immediately begin making changes to regain freedom and success. Cut your daily operations time in half. Improve your quality of life and prepare your business for your future exit without losing revenue or profit. Visit businessburnouttest.com now and take the test. Thank you for listening to another edition of The Root of All Success with the real Jason Duncan. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, visit therootofallsuccess.com to access the show notes and other helpful resources. Follow Jason on social media at The Real Jason Duncan. See you again next time here on The Root of All Success.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.